Indiana MoneyWise is a financial education program designed to increase financial literacy in Hoosiers and educate them about smart money management and how to avoid becoming the victim of scams. Today we're going to talk about investment fraud. In the investment world, we look at several factors in determining whether fraud has been committed. It is unlawful for a person in connection with the offer, sale, or purchase of a security, directly or indirectly, to employ a device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, to make an untrue statement of material fact, or to omit to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statement made, in light of the circumstances under which they were made, not misleading, or to engage in an act, practice, or course of business that operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon another person. In other words, had they told you the truth, you wouldn't have bought it. Americans lose an estimated $40 billion each year to investment fraud, but despite the risk, a statewide survey conducted by the Secretary of State's office showed that nearly 2/3 of Indiana adults who owned financial investments had little or no knowledge about potential fraud schemes or the security of such investments. Investor education is key. A good place to start our conversation about investment fraud is with the Ponzi scheme. That's because this is probably the most popular method used by fraudsters to take money from investors. It's named after Charles Ponzi. This Italian-born businessman became known in the early 1920s as a swindler in North America. He promised clients a 50% profit within 45 days or a 100% profit within 90 days. He paid off early investors by using money from recent investors. Charles Ponzi ran his scheme for years before it collapsed, costing his investors $20 million. In today's money, that would equal nearly $240 million. Even the hit series Downton Abbey has discussed the Ponzi scheme, providing you with some fun historical perspective. Click play to watch the video clip. To help you better understand how a Ponzi scheme works, we found this entertaining and educational video. Click play to discover everything you want to know about a Ponzi scheme, but are afraid to ask. Now let's take a look at some examples of investment fraud committed right here in Indiana. Many of you probably recognize Marcus Schrenker. He is perhaps the most well-known investment fraudster in Indiana. Schrenker was an Indianapolis businessman who swindled roughly $1.5 million from 9 clients, including a friend of 10 years and his own aunt. He convinced them to invest in a foreign currency fund that didn't actually exist. In January of 2009, he parachuted out of his own plane, which later crashed into the Florida Panhandle. Schrenker was found 2 days later at a Florida campground. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of securities fraud and 2 counts of working as an investment banker without being registered, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was just released from prison on September 15, 2015. Keenan Houck was a prominent money manager in Fishers who managed Samex Capital Partners, LLC. In December of 2011, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison after 97 investors lost over $9 million in a Ponzi scheme. Thanks to quick action by the Indiana securities team, Houck's assets were frozen within days of our discovery of the scheme, allowing for an initial $1 million in restitution to be returned to victims. In addition, several of Houck's victims have also received money from the Indiana Secretary of State's Restitution Fund, which is the first of its kind in the nation. Since July of 2010, over $42,000 have been returned to 4 separate victims from that restitution fund. Also, in the summer of 2014, Houck's accounting firm, DeWitt & Schrader, agreed to pay $1.8 million to settle a lawsuit with Indiana Secretary of State Connie Lawson's office for its role in contributing to investor losses. Plus, there's still a condo in Barbados to be sold that Houck purchased with investor money. Houck's projected release date from prison is January 2nd, 2021. In 2010, former pastor Vaughn Reeves of Sullivan, Indiana, was sentenced to 54 years in prison after being found guilty on 9 counts of securities fraud. He and his 3 sons pocketed money intended for church bonds by using faith-based appeals and a Ponzi scheme. Some 11,000 people lost a total of $120 million. Victims believed they were investing money that would be used to build churches through a company called Al-Anon. Sales pitches included prayers and Bible passages. Reeves and his sons diverted the money from new investors to pay off previous investors, while also pocketing $6 million and buying 2 airplanes, sports cars, and vacations. The Secretary of State's office began investigating Richard Schwartz in July of 2013 after receiving investor complaints regarding failure to pay. Schwartz took his own life the following month, but the effort to help investors get their money back continues. Investigators allege that Richard Schwartz ran a $5 to $10 million Ponzi scheme. He offered insurance products, annuities, and general wealth management advice out of a Kokomo office. But investigators say the securities he offered were fictional and that he used the money instead to fund his lavish lifestyle. In October of 2013, the Indiana Secretary of State, Connie Lawson, filed a lawsuit to freeze assets, including Schwartz's $13 million life insurance policy. In January of 2014, Ryan Kester, pictured here, was sentenced to 16 years in prison and ordered to pay over $517,000 in restitution for his role in stealing $1.5 million from 24 investors in Johnson and Hendricks counties, as well as the state of Colorado. Kester solicited clients through his company, Ryko Works Capital Group, claiming to be an expert in. Now that we have a better understanding of fraudsters, let's take a look at the victims. There was a time when a fool and his money were soon parted, but now it happens to everybody. This quote demonstrates an important takeaway as we discuss investment fraud. Victims are often well-educated, intelligent people, people who we think should know better than to fall into financial crisis or make bad investment decisions. Sometimes, it's hard to see past the flashing dollar signs. Victims include doctors, lawyers, college students, even celebrities. Retired NFL players may be among Richard Schwartz's victims, and director Steven Spielberg was one of Bernie Madoff's victims. You may recall that he made off with some $65 billion in a Ponzi scheme that defrauded many people in the Jewish community. To help you understand how fraudsters gain the trust of their victims, let's discuss the common method of affinity fraud. This type of fraud preys on the trust of members of a targeted group, organization, or community by exploiting similarities of the members. This type of fraud works because it's human nature to trust people who have similar beliefs or interests. You may belong to the. Now for an example of senior fraud. In July of 2013, Thomas Redmond Jr. was sentenced to 4 years in prison and 6 years work release after being convicted of 8 felonies. The purpose of this online presentation by Indiana MoneyWise is to prevent you from becoming a victim of investment fraud. So let's take a look at some of the. The best way to avoid becoming a victim is to ask questions. Where did you get my name? What risks are involved with the investment? Can you send me a detailed explanation of the investment? And where are you and the investment registered? If you ever become a you can file a complaint with the Securities Division by calling toll-free 1-800-223-8791 or by visiting indianamoneywise.com. You may also reach out. Thank you for listening. This presentation is brought to you by the Office of the Indiana Secretary of State. The information within is free and provided for educational purposes. If you would like to schedule a live presentation in your school, office, church, or community, please contact our Investor Education Coordinator, Kelly Greasy, at kgreasy@sos.in.gov or 317